this week's focus is cravings are not failure, they are information. So if you are dealing with strong cravings or binge eating or emotional eating, any of that, especially if you know you have ADHD or you deal with ADHD symptoms, this is information that you need to be listening to your body about, right? So don't just ignore it, focus in on it and learn from it. All right. So in the workbook, I created a cravings log. So that'll be your assignment for what I want you all to do is to kind of start getting in touch with your cravings and understanding where they are coming from. Because sometimes we just mindlessly snack and eat, and we're not really thinking about what our body is trying to tell us. So in order to get more in tune with that, you would use the log to track a couple cravings throughout the week and what time those cravings are showing up, what emotional feelings are you feeling, or what things do you feel like you might need in that moment that you are just using food as a way to cope, right? All right, so if you just to kind of break down like why we use food in the way that we do, especially for us, those of us that have ADHD. If you've ever reached for any type of snacks and then you felt guilty afterwards, or you eat for comfort, or have gone all day without eating and then binged at night, this is something that is so common within the ADHD community. So you are not alone in this. That is why I'm trying to create this community. I think that as African American women, we just kind of try to deal with these things on our own, but they are hindering us from getting goals or meeting goals that we want to meet. So it's important to kind of talk amongst each other, and know that you're not alone in what you're feeling, right? So this week is more about understanding why these things happen, especially when you're living with ADHD and you're carrying the weight of also being a Black woman in a world that often expects you to just push through, hold it down, show up, get it done, that kind of thing. So, just in general, women with ADHD, we are really good at masking our symptoms because we don't want to show up in a world seeming less than or weak or unable to get the job done. We push all the things that we're dealing with to the side, and that's really, really, really not good. It's more of a trigger for your ADHD, and it can send you down this path of emotional eating, right? So let's break down what's happening in your brain during these times. So ADHD is not about attention, even though it's attention deficit disorder, it's not necessarily about attention. It's more about regulating dopamine in your brain. So dopamine is the chemical in your brain that is tied to motivation, pleasure, focus, impulse control. And when dopamine is low, your brain starts to look for quick ways to get the dopamine back up, right? So with people with ADHD, we already have a deficit of this. We already are dopamine depleted, or we don't have the same amount as most people. So then when what we do have drops or depletes even more, we are trying to find quick ways to get that dopamine back up, right? So we can do this through looking for food, especially sugary foods or salty snacks, fast foods, things like that. That gives us the hit that we are seeking, but it's just a temporary hit. It's not long lasting. It doesn't satisfy us long term, right? So that's not necessarily a weakness of ADHD. It's just how our brains and bodies are made, right? So don't think of this as a weakness. It is your biology. It's how your body and your brain are made up, right? So if you find yourself craving chips, candy, carbs, or you're feeling, or you get those cravings when you're feeling overwhelmed, bored, tired, that is your brain saying, I'm trying to make you feel better, right? So being in tune with that can kind of help to deter what you eat in those moments or what you decide to do to get your dopamine that your body is needing. That can help you kind of understand what you need and what you should do in that moment versus just going for the salty, sugary snacks, right? Um, so the problem is that food is temporary, like certain foods. It gives you a temporary dopamine hit, and then afterwards you get into this cycle of feeling guilt and shame, or feeling out of control, right? Especially with ADHD, the feeling of being out of control when it comes to certain things, that's just gonna come, right? So food is basically an emotional or survival tactic in our culture also. So it's a twofold thing, right? For Black women, the emotional connection with food that runs deep, that's cultural. So not just on a biological level, but also on a cultural level and a generational level, we are using food as a way to cope through life, right? So we come from a group of people who learn to survive on very little food. And then we learn to use food as acts of love, acts of service, acts of resilience. And then we also weren't taught, or we didn't have the spaces to talk about our emotions, our trauma, or our mental health. So we naturally shove everything down, right? So that's like a twofold thing with ADHD that is impacting the way you respond to your emotions. So sometimes food can become the language that we use to cope, to celebrate, to grieve, or just to get through the day. Add ADHD on top of that, and now your brain is basically constantly overwhelmed. You're operating in a constant state of overwhelm, a constant state of being understimulated, or you are constantly craving some form of relief, either emotionally or neurologically, right? So it's not about just eating, it's about soothing and surviving. And often, maybe you don't feel safe or heard or comfortable, you know, in whatever moment it is. So, what can you do instead, right? How do we move through that? So, the goal isn't to stop your emotional eating completely. It's not a switch that you could just flip off and say, okay, I'm gonna stop eating emotionally. Even though getting in tune with what you need in the moment is helpful, it's not gonna stop overnight. You're still gonna have those moments, right? So you have to be realistic with yourself. Food is an emotional thing. So it's okay to eat for comfort sometimes. Everybody does it. Even people who do not have ADHD use food for comfort. It's used for a lot of different purposes. So it's not abnormal to use it, but how often are you falling into those cycles, right? What can we do to, come out of those cycles on a regular basis? All right. So there are some things that we can do, some tools that we can kind of add to our arsenal so that food isn't our only way to cope. So you have to develop other coping skills, right? Food might be your only coping skill. And I'm talking about food, but some of us might use alcohol as a coping skill. Some of us might use shopping as a coping skill. So it's not just food, but because I know about nutrition, that is why we are talking about nutrition. But this can kind of go for anything. Where do you lean to when you are needing to cope with your emotions? What are the things that you reach for? That is your coping skill. Is it a healthy coping skill or is it an unhealthy coping skill, right? So all of that is important. So some tools that you can try is, first, you need to pause before you eat and take a second to ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Just really take that moment and just ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? That may or may not stop you from reaching or eating the food that you are reaching for, but it gives you an opportunity to kind of process and think about what emotions you're dealing with in the moment. All right. It's also important that you learn to keep easy, nourishing snacks on hand so you're not skipping meals, because we've talked about this before, right? We talked about skipping meals and how that can lead to just crashing or binging later, right? So if you have healthy snacks on hand all the time, you can make sure you're staying nourished throughout the day so you don't fall into a binge eating cycle. So we'll talk more next week about the types of foods that's important for this, but protein and fiber are two things that are not only good for ADHD, but also help to balance your cravings in general with anybody, right? That keeps you satiated, keeps you satisfied, all of that. All right, you also want to create a dopamine list. So these are things that give you pleasure or stimulation that are not food, right? But you want to make sure these things are healthy. You don't want to start developing other unhealthy coping skills. So some healthy ones would be music, right? Stretching, exercise is good for dopamine. Maybe having connections with other people. This one can be hard for us with ADHD, but you can connect with other people, and having those connections are a way to kind of give you a dopamine hit, right? If it's a positive connection with somebody who you care about or love. All right. And then just get outside, like literally breathing fresh air, getting in the sun is good for dopamine, right? So I have started a garden. I started gardening like 2 years ago. That is my way to get outside, get fresh air, get some sunlight, on top of, when I go out and go running and things like that. But try to find ways to get outside. All right. So just kind of take a moment and think about like a recent craving that you had, right? Think about a recent craving that you may have had as far as food, or it could be even something that wasn't food that you used to cope. Think about if you were physically hungry. Were you emotionally tired? Were you bored? Were you stressed? Like, what was going on in the moment? Right? And then what did the craving represent to you in that moment? What feeling, what emotion, what satisfaction was that craving representing in the moment? All right. And then what is something that you can possibly try next time to not necessarily replace the food, but to add, oh, my bad. Not necessarily replace the food, but to add care to yourself in a different way. All right. Now, I also want to talk about just giving you all some tools to kind of help with binge eating in general. Right. And those questions I just went over, if you are looking at the live on YouTube, it is on page 12 of the workbook. That's going to be your assignment for the week. But that's how I want you to kind of process the assignment. All right. So there are ways that you can also do this through foods, right? Or how to stop binge eating over time. It's not, again, like I said, it's not going to happen overnight, but some things that you might not think will help, but actually do help. First would be to eat more foods, right? So it sounds counterintuitive. It sounds like, okay, well, I'm trying to lose weight and I'm trying to overcome these cravings, these like crazy cravings, but you're telling me to eat more. But you have to really think about the reason that you're binge eating. If you have restricted throughout the day, then that will lead to binge eating. So most binge eating is resulting from you restricting calories at some point throughout the day. So being honest about that and saying, okay, yeah, I don't eat breakfast. Like I skip breakfast every day. That is you restricting calories from your diet, right? And it's going to lead to you eating way more at some point throughout the day. So start eating regular meals. I've talked about this. I've done shorts on this. I've done videos on this. It's important to eat more when you have ADHD because We tend to skip, we tend to forget to eat, we tend to do all of that, and that is cutting or restricting our calories. That sends us into the cycle of binging. All right. You want to learn to add more variety to your diet. Again, we'll talk about specific foods next week. But just make sure that you are eating balanced plates. So you have your vegetables, you have your healthy fats, you have your proteins, you have your fibers. All of those foods are super important for your brain and also help to keep you feeling full, right? So you can do something like the thirds method. All right. So if you look at your plate, imagine that it's divided into 3 parts. And if you skip ahead in the workbook, I have like an example of that in there. But a third of your plate should be veggies, a third of your plate should be protein, and then you have your fruits, which would be another third, right? And then you add healthy fats just a little bit. We'll talk more about that next week. But that is a way that you can kind of learn to add more variety to your diet. And then also stop thinking of food as like good and bad. So us with ADHD, we have a really bad way of black and white thinking. So this food is good, this food is bad. Then you eat the bad food, then you feel bad about eating the bad food, and then that sends you into another mental gymnastic cycle. So stop thinking about food that way and just think about enjoying the foods that you like, but also adding, how can you add healthier food options to your day to day, right? So you enjoy your food, whatever it is that you deem to be a bad food, which really isn't bad. It's just a food that you enjoy. Some foods are meant to be enjoyed, but how can you cook that particular food in a different way to make it healthier? Or can you add something to it to make it healthier? Or can you just add foods throughout the day that are healthier, that kind of balance out, your healthier options with your less healthier options, right? So you don't want to replace meals or snacks with things like coffee. Coffee is an appetite suppressant. This is why a lot of us do not eat in the morning. We might do coffee first thing in the morning instead of like having a meal, and that's going to suppress your appetite. So then you go into that cycle of not getting the calories that you need, and then you might binge eat later to make up for it, and then even overeat later. So try not to do caffeine too early, or if you do caffeine, do something like a protein shake. So this is what I do in the morning because I don't have time to like make meals. A lot of times it's something quick like oatmeal or a bagel with some avocado toast on it. However, most mornings now I do a coffee protein shake. So I get protein powder, I get some cold coffee, and I get some either almond milk or oat milk, and I blend all that up together, and that is my breakfast. So I'm getting protein first thing in the morning, but that is mixed in with my coffee. So it's not like I'm skipping out on calories. I'm getting a meal in. It's just not like eggs, bacon, toast. It's not like a full meal. But because protein is so important, you need to be trying to get that in early every single day, right? Some form of protein, whether you decide do you want to cook a meal and you do eggs or protein pancakes or whatever the case is, but try to get some protein in first thing in the morning. All right. Again, we talked about keeping the snacks on hand and the importance of that and how that works. Ansley says, is intermittent fasting a thing or have a meal routine? So the thing with intermittent fasting, it is a thing, and it is actually a good thing, and it can be done. But the thing about, if you have to know you, right? You have to know yourself. So if you want to do intermittent fasting, the one way that I would recommend that you do it is that you eat your calories early. So I would say like breaking your fast as early as possible, maybe like 9-10 o'clock in the morning, if possible, or even earlier if you stop eating earlier. So if you stop eating at like 4 and then you can break your fast even earlier the next morning. That way you get your calories in earlier. That's really important for the circadian rhythm of your body and the way your body processes and digests foods. Trying to get your last meal in before it gets too late is really important. So if you're going to intermittent fast, that's how I would recommend it. But for some of us, intermittent fasting can lead to binge eating. So if you notice that cycle, then probably intermittent fasting is not for you, or at least until you get a hold of binge eating. So some of us want to jump right into something like intermittent fasting, and maybe it works for a little while, and then you end up in a binge eating cycle. So that's not good, right? So you need to learn how to deal with the emotional part of binge eating first, and then you can do something like intermittent fasting. So that's my recommendation. All right. So do we have any more questions before we get ready to wrap up class? Welcome to the live. If you are watching on TikTok, let me check YouTube, see if I have any questions. I'm gonna post the recording in the group instead. I might end up doing that every week since I seem to have an issue every single week. All right, no questions there. All right, y'all, this might be a quick class tonight. All right, so I talked about things we could try. I talked about the assignment. So just to bring this all tied up in a bow and bring it to a close, this week isn't about tracking your calories. It's not about labeling foods either good or bad. It is about getting curious or learning and understanding what your patterns are. Not being judgmental of your patterns, but getting clarity on why you operate the way you operate, why you eat the way you eat, right? So that is what the assignment is for. And as Black women with ADHD, understanding that we kind of have been conditioned to push through. We've been conditioned to minimize our own needs and to feel like eating has to be perfect. Like there's a perfect way to eat or a controlled way to eat. And that is not healthy thinking either. So culturally, we have unhealthy patterns around food just ingrained in us, right? So recognizing those and also learning to be more aware of that as well. All right. So as Black women, especially Black women with ADHD, it's important to understand that you deserve to have softness and nourishment in your life. And it's important to have those tools that help you to meet you where you are. All right. And that's the intent for this week, is to help with building that mindset, right? Each week, we're going to build on that mindset that because you're a Black woman with ADHD, you deserve softness, you deserve care, you deserve nourishment, healthy nourishment. You deserve to be in tune with your emotions and your feelings, and to cope with those things in a emotionally aware, emotionally healthy way, right? Through foods, right? You can use food to do that. All right. And then even other ways, because one of those things was to kind of focus on other ways that you can cope. So something else I don't think is like highlighted in the workbook, but I want you to find an unhealthy coping mechanism that you use, whether it's food or anything else, and trade that or figure out a healthy alternative, a healthy coping mechanism. All right. Any questions before I get out of here? Thank you for those who joined the live. I appreciate it. If you are in my class on the Human Talk website, thank you for joining. The assignment will be open. You do have to complete module 1 before module 2 will open. So just FYI. But I do want to give out certificates. So please go through the modules and complete the assignments there as well. Not just in your workbooks, but on the Human Talk class. All right. So I will see you all for office hours tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. If you want to talk through your reflections, or if you want to ask me questions about the course, or you have anything that comes up, I will be available at 11 a.m. If nobody jumps on, I'll probably jump out like 11:15. So I'll give it like 15 minutes for you all that want to discuss. All right. So my message to you this week is to be gentle with yourself and just love yourself. You all are doing beautifully. All right. Thank you for joining the class, and I will see you all tomorrow morning. Deuces. If I can get out of here. Good night, everybody.